Why do you feel so far from God when you're depressed? I got asked this question many times by my Christian patients who came to see me at my mental health clinic. You see, mental health problems like depression, anxiety, mood swings, and schizophrenia, these are the only conditions that I'm aware of that actually have spiritual symptoms, not just the physical or mental symptoms. So as Christians, we are very interested in how these conditions affect us because of the spiritual symptoms. So I like to think of the human spirit, your personal spirit, is like an antenna. It's like an antenna dish that's directed towards God. And that's the frequency that we send and receive from God. But when you have a mood disorder like depression, it's almost like the antenna gets knocked down so it no longer transmits and receives properly. And so even though God hasn't moved and you haven't moved and your salvation hasn't been affected, but your ability to send and receive, to feel that inner confirmation of your salvation has been affected by the illness. So let's talk about how depression actually affects you spiritually. Well, there are 4 things we do as Christians to be devotional, and I want you to see how depression affects those 4 things. Well, the first thing we do is pray. Well, prayer requires concentration, and as you know, depression wipes out concentration because you can't shut off your mind. And the other thing about prayer is when you pray, you presume that someone is listening to your prayers. Well, in depression, you don't think anyone's listening to your prayers. You just feel cut off and isolated, so why bother praying? So depressed people stop praying. It's just too difficult. Then the second thing we do is worship. Well, worship implies that you have something to celebrate. Well, depressed people don't have anything to celebrate. Also, worship, if it's done properly, requires concentration. And of course, depression wipes that out too. So now, both praying and worshiping is wiped out by depression. Then the third thing we do to be devotional is we read the Bible. Well, the Bible isn't always light reading. It requires a lot of concentration. And of course, depressed people can't concentrate, so they stop reading the Bible. So now they've stopped praying, they've stopped worshiping, and they've stopped reading the Bible. And the fourth thing we do to be devotional is we go to meetings. We attend church services. But depressed people find it very difficult to be in crowds and to be places where there's small talk. In fact, the most awkward thing that a depressed person can hear when they're out socially is, "Hi, how are you?" Because they don't want to say, "Well, I want to die, thank you very much. How are you?" And so it's awkward to be in social circumstances. So depression wipes out the 4 most important things we do to be devotional. And so if you have depression and those 4 things get wiped out, you really feel unplugged spiritually. And many of my depressed Christian patients came to me feeling that they had lost their salvation. But this just isn't true. God hasn't moved, only your antenna has moved. Your salvation is not in doubt just because you have depression. So the good news is that as you recover, God comes back. Not that he actually has moved, it's just your antenna goes back into proper position and your ability to send and receive to God comes back. That inner witness comes back as your mind clears of the depressing thought patterns and you're able to reconnect spiritually. So the key is, if you're feeling unplugged spiritually because of your depression, get the depression treated aggressively and your spiritual life will return. I've seen it happen many times. So there is hope. Stick with the treatment process.